So let's get started. Today we have our expert guest speaker, who is David Kravenchuk. David is the founder of the Common Good Fundraising, and he works with clients across Canada and internationally. He develops and executes successful strategies for annual giving and legacy marketing programs that build value through meaningful donor relationships. Today, the title of this session is Thanks a Million, Boost Your Donor Loyalty and Revenue with Simple Stewardship Strategies. All right, thanks so much for joining us today, David. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'll pass it off to you now if you want to start sharing your screen.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm just going to get going here and see if I can share my screen. One moment, please, everybody. All right. I'm so glad that we have an opportunity to get together to talk about stewardship, which is one of my very favorite topics, and especially during this time of crushing uncertainty, I think, is how I feel often with the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's really turned our work lives and the charitable sector on its end. And so how do you deal with that kind of uncertainty? And when we have this opportunity with the pandemic to take a step back and look at how we're working day to day, how we're structuring our programs, the approach that we have in our charities. And so that's the opportunity that we have with COVID. And so what I always try to look for are, what are the solid kind of guaranteed ways that we can, first of all, protect our revenue, protect our fundraising, and also look to grow. And stewardship, no matter whether it's during a pandemic or during great economic times, is really the key to that sustainability for the future and also a path to growth. So I'm super passionate about it, and I'm really glad that we have an opportunity to talk about some of those really great strategic ways that we can build more meaningful, deeper relationships with our donors and boost that loyalty and boost revenue. So Mel already gave a fantastic introduction. Thank you, Mel, for that. You can find me on Twitter at David Kravenchuk, and you can also learn a little bit more about the work that we do at the Common Good on our website. Okay, so this is what I promised we would do today. We would dive into some of the strategies around building that donor loyalty and what tools we can use to engage our donors. I don't know about you, but when I read a blog, when I go to a conference, if we ever get to do that again, or when I attend a webinar, I'm always looking for those, little ideas that I can put to work right away. Something that is relatively simple and painless, something that maybe I can just shift a little bit in my thinking of what I'm already doing. And so I want to share some of those with you so you can have some quick wins. And I don't know about you, but for me right now, I take every quick win that I can get during this crazy time. And one of my favorite things to do is a little bit of show and tell. So looking at some great creative ideas that are out there from our clients and from even other agencies that are doing really great work. So let's look at some of those and get some inspiration for our own programs. All right. So before we get into kind of the mechanics, let's talk about the why for a moment. Why do we invest in stewardship? And it's not just money that we need, and we do need money. We need a budget for stewardship. This is one of the things that I'm very concerned about with charities right now, is as they're looking to save budget, as they see their revenues shrink. If you're in that position, which many charities are across North America, I worry that the stewardship budget will get slashed. And it's really a long-term investment. So we need to make sure we protect that investment as much as possible. And to do that, we've got to fight for it and give some great reasoning. So let's talk about that for a second. And it's also not just money, it's about time. I mean, all of us fundraisers are always stretched for time. There's always another thing to do on the to-do list. And so I want to make sure that stewardship is one of those for you. And the reasons are all about, yes, building great connections with your donors, people that we feel simpatico with because we share a passion for the mission of our organizations too, just like your donors. But it's also about the math, and it's about the revenue. When you invest in stewardship, you're going to retain more donors. And we all know that acquisition, bringing on a new donor to your charity, costs a lot of money and takes a lot of effort. So anything we can do to retain them once they come on board, to protect that investment that you made in your acquisition, that's going to save you a ton of money down the road. And then we know from some great research Dr. Adrian Sargent did probably 20 years ago now, that just a 10% increase in retention rates doubles the donor lifetime giving potential, or the lifetime value of your donor. So just 10% increase doubles that lifetime value. So that creates sustainability and even, in some cases, transformative growth for your charity. Think about what you could do if you had double the amount of money on an annual basis or over a 5-year term. These are critical things right now, and if we can figure out a way to do that during this time and during a difficult time, just imagine, the footing you'll be on in 2 or 3 years when the economy hopefully is back to normal. We're back to some semblance of normal. Okay, and then the other side is, I know we're the feeling sector, the touchy-feely sector, right? We don't want to necessarily think about other charities as competition, but the smartest charities out there are investing in donor stewardship, and there's a limited number of donors, and they often are giving to more than one charity, usually 5 or 6 or sometimes even 10. So when they're forced to make a decision because of their economic situation on having to cut back perhaps, only working with maybe 1 or 2 charities versus 5 or 6, you want to make sure you're at the top of that list. And smart charities are investing in stewardship long before COVID. So whether it's a point of catch up or protecting your position a little bit, I just urge all of you to make that investment in your stewardship program. All right, so let's talk about tools. We're going to go through a few of the main tools that you can use to connect with your donors, things that you're probably already doing now. And we're going to look at them through some interesting lenses of how you use those tools to build deep relationships and build loyalty with your donors. So we'll talk about kind of 3 main areas. And you'll see I crossed off events here at the bottom. I feel like this is a complete session all on its own about how we're going to be shifting around events, around working with our donors at events, whether they're fundraising events or stewardship events or a hybrid of both during COVID and the immediate aftermath of the pandemic. So I'm just going to leave that one alone. There's certainly work in kind of normal times that's really fantastic that you can do with your events, but I'm going to stick to the main pieces right now. So you really have the tools that you need to get to work on increasing that donor loyalty right now during this time. Okay, I'm going to talk a lot about thank you letters, and you're going to see that I have email in brackets, and I just wanted to explain myself a little bit there. Email is a very powerful fundraising tool and stewardship tool. In fact, it's the best digital tool we have, the most effective one. And it likely will remain so for many, many years. It's very important that we do a great job of stewarding our donors and writing great emails that help develop that relationship and move it along with our donors. But I have a letter, and by that I mean, a physical piece of paper that's mailed to a donor's home. And that really has primacy. And the reason why I'm going to get up on the soapbox about that is because paper is powerful. We know from all kinds of really interesting research that when people receive paper, when they read paper, the context of what they learn is much deeper. It goes into memory. It affects people in a much deeper way. And even the tactile sense of holding a piece of paper, of holding a letter in their hand, develops really interesting connections in the brain that are emotional. So it's really important that we do a great job on the actual letter that we want to send. And I know a lot of charities, especially as we're seeing digital first charities, where most or all of your funds raised are done online. I really encourage people to think about the strategic use of paper. And the thank you letter, very simple, is something that we should be looking at very seriously if you're a digital first organization. And for everyone else, we should continue using our thank you letters, but we're going to talk about how to make them fantastic. Now, everything I'm going to talk about around the letters, everything we kind of have a look at today also applies equally to email. And we'll look at a couple of examples of email. We need to make sure we do a good job of sending, those acknowledgement emails when somebody makes a gift online, or even just a follow-up email to let people know how their gifts are impacting your work. Those are critical, and we'll look at those. But again, I'm just going to stress on my soapbox around the power of the paper postage stamped thank you letter. Okay. So the tools that really make these effective, and to be honest, these are tools that really make all writing effective, but really it's critical in your thank you, is to make sure that it's personal, emotional, that we do a little bit of a mini stewardship report to let donors know that they made a good investment, because that builds trust and confidence. So I want to just take you through a couple of examples and show you, kind of what that means. And the first here is in the background, you can see a draft we were working on for a client of ours some years ago around a thank you letter to donors who made a gift to the Strawberry Children's Hospital Foundation, which is a large children's hospital in Edmonton, Canada. And the original ask that the donors responded to told the story of Muskan, this little 6-year-old girl who had come to the Stollery to receive her second and then her third heart. And the letter was written by her father. He shared his story about how during his precious little daughter's few years, he had to give her CPR many times while waiting for an ambulance after her heart stopped, and had, watched her literally, die in his arms several times to be revived later by EMT. And it was a very emotional story. And Muskan brought in some pieces where she talked about how the freedom she felt the first time she was able to run and play with her new heart. Just a very powerful and emotional story. So we knew that when we sent the thank you letter, it also had to be very personal, emotional. It had to have that tone. And so we worked really hard to make sure that we added in some elements that made it feel very personal. So the thank you letter was written from the hospital's Hospital Foundation CEO. a fellow by the name of Mike. And Mike's a dad, and he's a dad with daughters. So he really did feel a personal connection to Muskan's dad as he, told his story. And Mike imagined himself, as that father, having to give CPR to his daughter. And we really wanted to make that personal connection to the donor too, so that they felt, Mike's not just the CEO of a hospital foundation whose job it is to raise money, but he has a personal connection to this cause and to the stories that are at the Stollery. So we wanted to bring that into the thank you letter. We also wanted to make it very emotional, just like the original letter was. So we wanted to kind of bring that back into the thank you letter. We wanted to invest the amount of time and effort and energy in the thank you as we did in the solicitation. And I think this is sometimes the missed opportunity that we have with our thank you pieces, right? And I know it's not easy because, a lot of times we're taught that the professional is more important than the personal or the emotional. And many of us have that thank you letter that goes on the bottom of your of your tax receipt, right? It might even be in your software set up already. It might start with something like, on behalf of the board, or on behalf of the board and staff. Something that doesn't feel very personal or emotional. And we have to remember that that's our currency with donors. We are making personal and emotional connection with them through our solicitations, through our work. And that's why they're giving to us. So we want to make sure we're thanking them in the same way and with the same principles. So that's really key. All right, so moving on, what else can we do in a thank you letter? I like to show some donors, almost like a little mini report. This is, sorry, I'll go back for a second. This is a little piece that we did. Again, this was for the Stollery as well, around a special program that they had through a charity golf tournament that they were a recipient donor of. And that was created matching funds for people who, a matching fund opportunity for people who gave to this campaign. So we built a campaign around their ambassador, this young lady named Jocelyn, who was a recipient of services, some travel services, having to have an emergency medical evacuation because of her condition. She needed, and she lives in a more remote community, a fair distance from the Stollery. So, whether that was, she was on a medevac flight on a couple of occasions and on long distance ambulance on others. So that was what the campaign was for. And in the thank you, we wanted to make sure that we captured some of Jocelyn's spirit, but we also wanted to let donors know that, how the campaign turned out. They were invested in that campaign, and they really wanted to help kids like Jocelyn who live in remote communities have access to a transportation program during emergencies to make sure that they can make it to the best hospital to treat their condition. So we made sure that, we reiterated the goals of the campaign in the thank you letter, like a little bit of a repetition and report back. And we just made sure that we let them know that it was doubled, so it was matched in the campaign as we had promised, right? We want to make sure that we're telling them that we did what we promised we would do. And we wanted to let them know how great the campaign did. So we gave them an update on the total value and how much money that would be available to help families just like Jocelyn's in the future. So the final thing that I want to emphasize in the thank you letter, and really this to me is the most important thing that you can do. If there's anything you do, in your thank you letters, and frankly, in any of your correspondence. It's this. I call it a kind contact. We want the signatory to invite the donor to contact them directly. And I know it can be scary if the signatory of the letter is your CEO and is a very, very busy person. Look, I get it. It's not necessarily easy to convince this person to do that. And it can seem like you're putting your direct telephone line and email address out there and opening yourself up to hundreds, thousands, depending on the size of your charity, perhaps even millions of people that will now call your office line or send you an email. The reality is most people won't. But just by being invited to have that personal connection helps build that direct relationship with people. And trust me, if a donor needs to contact you for some reason, if they want to reach out to you, either to make a complaint, which is generally something that you really need to know about, if there's an issue from a donor, you'll want to know. Or they have a compliment, that's probably a little less likely. But very often, these kinds of contacts are about making a special kind of gift. And I have a little bit of a story about this. When I worked at a large Canadian university many years ago, we started putting the manager of our annual giving programs direct contact information on all our thank you letters that went out. And we braced ourselves for impact because that was, thousands of letters that went out to thousands of donors. And we thought, if something goes wrong or, if we inspire a lot of them to actually call, at the time, my boss would be so very busy taking those calls and answering emails. And the reality is, it just didn't happen. There was a few calls here and there, and they were absolutely, concerns or complaints, a couple of them on things that we were able to fix, and we never would have known about them if the donor hadn't told us. There were important updates to a donor record, some information that was incorrect. That was great. And there was also some gifts. Years later, when I became the manager there, we continued that practice, and I received a phone call from a fellow who wanted to make a gift of stock that turned out to be worth $87,000. And his only gift to us before was a $100 gift to his son's faculty. So he didn't even have that deep of a connection. But because he didn't have to go through, voicemail hell or, emailing an info@ number or, contacting somebody who would transfer them 6 times and then, the call would get dropped, he could call a real person with a real name and ask them for help. And even though I wasn't a plan giving expert, I was able to literally run down the hall and get my colleague, my plan giving colleague, to come sit at my desk and get the information about the gift right then and there. So to me, that's really the power of this. It will help you connect with your donors. There's nothing more frustrating than if you're trying to reach a person to ask them about a large gift or a significant act of kindness or generosity that you can't actually find a person's name or how to reach them. So please, please do this in your thank you letters. You'll thank me, I'm sure, when that large gift comes in. And I'd love to know if you do change this practice, please let me know if what happens. I love these stories. All right. So enough about thank you letters. I'll get off my soapbox about that one. And we'll talk a little bit about email. So all the things that we do in a thank you letter, we absolutely want to put in our thank you emails and our acknowledgement emails. So this is a little example of one that we did for a client a few years back. And, we just reinforced again, why they gave their gift. This was language that we used in the ask. That we wanted them to help. They were part of this community, and they were supporting that community of like-minded, engaged, informed, fearlessly Canadian citizens. And so we just echoed that again in the thank you letter. Again, almost like a mini reinforcement of why they're connected to us and why they made their gift. And again, we made sure that it was really easy for them to contact May, who was the person responsible for the relationship with donors at that time. And it was really easy for them just to click on that as they were reading, if they had a question, a thought, something like that. Of course, they could have just replied, or, you know, we could set all of that up, and that's important too. But giving them, giving your donors, making it easy for your donors is also a fantastic way to help your relationship too. So it never hurts to put those extra links in. Okay. This was an email that I got from the Canadian Red Cross that I really, really loved. This was after the Fort McMurray, the devastating Fort McMurray fires that, for those of you who aren't in Canada, it was a town of about 85,000 people that had to be completely evacuated about 4 years ago because of a terrible, terrible wildfire. And it really drove a massive outpouring of support from Canadians all across the country. And I just thought they did a really fantastic job of letting me know right away. This was just a few days after, you know, they had raised $50 million, you know, reminded me again that people were forced to evacuate, you know, leave their house and go. They literally, in just moments. And to let us know that right away they were putting out direct cash payments to people, so that people had money for groceries, that you know, people had money for gas for their car to drive to the next city, which literally is 500, 600 kilometers away, 300, 400 miles away. So that was a really fantastic piece of reporting back, I felt. And I also love this, that they talked about, you know, our gift was able to get those volunteers out in the field right away. And when you think about all the work and services that are delivered by Red Cross volunteers who are highly trained, it was just great to know that as a donor, I helped make that happen, and I helped support those volunteers in the work that they do. So a fantastic email. If you can take some ideas from how you use this for thanking your donors when they make a gift online, especially during a crisis campaign like this one, I think will go a long way to help you retain those donors, because after all, many of these donors to the Fort McMurray fires, to the Red Cross, were brand new donors to them, had never given before. And we don't want to have to wait till the next crisis for them to support the excellent work there again, right? We want to make sure that they're continuing to support us all the time. They'll make that second gift. So we want to continue to build that relationship with them. And the email is kind of that first step in that. Oh, and there we go, underlining there. This is another email from the Red Cross that talked a little bit about how much money was being spent. This was a little bit updated. And so we continued to show, or they continued to show us how they were using the money. And, you know, again, that's almost like a little mini stewardship report for the donor. And I just love this kind of immediate feedback for how my gift is being used. I don't have to wait for the annual report. I don't have to wait for a newsletter. You know, I'll hear the stories and everything later when you've had a chance to develop them, absolutely. But if you can do these quick little hits out to your donors to let them know that you've received their money, it's being used, it's being effective, it's helping the mission, it's helping people, that makes your donor feel fantastic. Because after all, that's what they gave to you. Okay, so this is the thing that inspires horror among so many fundraisers. And it is, to me, one of the most important fundraising tools that we've got, and one of the most underutilized. I'd love to ask for a hands up to see how many of you use the phone on a regular basis as a fundraising tool. And if any of you have seen me speak on annual giving, you'll know that this is something that I go into a lot. Yet another soapbox of mine. I'll spare you most of that, but we're going to talk just for a moment about thank you calls, because that's really, really powerful use of the phone. And so one thing that we really should be using the telephone for is to connecting with our donors immediately after a gift to thank them for that gift. There's really nothing more powerful than to have somebody pick up the phone, give you a call, and just say thank you. You know, in the era of getting, you know, a million spam calls, all that kind of thing, to actually have somebody on the other end of the phone just to say thank you is really, really powerful. And one of my favorite examples, now this is quite some time ago, but one of my favorite examples was, again, when I was at the University of Alberta, a large Canadian university. We were working very hard on building our stewardship program so we could boost our retention, because we had abysmal retention rates for our donors. And we're doing anything we could to do that. And we used the phone to really lead that effort. And while we did do some other things, and I'll show you a couple of examples of those actually a little bit later on, the phone really was the thing. So we committed to call every single donor to say thank you. So every caller, every donor that made a gift received a thank you call as soon as possible from our student calling program, just to say thank you. You know, take an opportunity to update and record if we needed to, you know, answer any questions that the donor might have, and just leave it simply at that. And again, we did do some other stewardship activities, and we did some smarter things around how we were working with our donors and stewarding them. But this was really the key backbone of our stewardship program. And we were able to, within about 2 years, boost our retention rate from low 60s into the mid 70s, which is a really significant increase. That's in that, you know, 10%, more than 10%, Dr. Sargent talks about, to double your lifetime value. So that was really key. The phone was really the key for that. And again, we also saw a lift in our conversion rate. So people who made a second gift, which is the most important gift a donor makes, right? The second gift, when they start to give you the sign that this is a relationship that might lead to some long-term loyal donor support. So we were seeing before that we only had in the low 20%. So, you know, a donor makes a gift, a brand new donor comes on board, makes a gift, only a 20% chance they'll make another gift again. So we were able to bring that up into the 30s. Still quite sad that we were excited about that, but again, a really powerful investment in keeping our donors on board, boosting that lifetime value. So the phone really, really is important. This is a little chart from an organization. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist anymore, but a really fantastic fundraising agency in the UK called Pell and Bales. Some of you may know their work from a few years back. It showed that just in general, when a donor received a call, even if they refused to make a gift or said they weren't interested, they were much more likely to be retained than donors who hadn't. So sorry, I see on my slide that the last word got cut off on the bottom, so my apologies. So that column that says 14%, those are contacts that refused to increase their gift or only had received the call and said they weren't interested and hung up. They were retained at a higher rate. They were much less likely to fall off the rolls of the donor database. Contacts who made a gift were only a little bit better, actually, at 16%. And people who weren't contacted, that was their average chance of falling off the rolls. So it's quite a significant amount when you see just by having that phone contact. These weren't all thank you calls, by the way. This was just having phone contact. There was a deeper loyalty and relationship with those donors who had received it versus not having received that. So please don't be afraid of the phone. It's a really fantastic tool and a really wonderful way if you have a board member or a boss who is terrified of telemarketing or using the phone to do fundraising. This is a great way to kind of introduce calling and introduce the phone as a powerful fundraising tool. And it's also a great way to engage other members of your staff to do some of these calls, engage volunteers, and engage your board members to come in and help you do a thankathon. So it's a win-win-win-win all around. And we need those now. Okay. Oh, I'm seeing that we have a question coming in. Maybe we'll save those and take them at the very end. And happy to. Oh, I see more hands coming up. I'm happy to take a pause and we can answer some questions now, or happy to continue on.
Whatever you want to do, David. I can read them off for you if you'd like, or we typically just do them at the end, but whatever you want to do.
Perfect. Okay, I'll keep on going, and then we'll take over, or we'll take those questions and work through them at the end. Thank you, everybody, for your patience on that front.
Perfect.
Great. So let's talk about, as we wrap up, let's talk about some of the other stuff that's out there and show some like maybe creative, interesting things that you could be doing with your strategic stewardship. So if your report, if your annual report looks like, is stacked up like this, I want to give you some other ideas of what we could do there. And this is one that I really love from the Agents of Good, actually, a fantastic competing agency, frankly, of mine. And they do just a great job of what they call donor love. They did this report some time ago for a women's shelter in Toronto, Canada, that really celebrated the donors and told the stories of donors and their connection to the cause and why they gave. People who gave time, so volunteer donors, as well as corporate donors, annual donors. So you're not just seeing, your rich and famous names in annual reports. I just love this approach, and I think they call it a gratitude report, and I think that's perfect. It really shows that donors, the donors that are in this report are just like you and I. They're connected. They're passionate about the same things that we are, and it's a genuine thank you to show you how your work has supported the organization. So really a fantastic example. Of course, all the other important stuff that you need to put in there as well. This is a piece that one of my clients did many years ago, and I still love it. They're a fantastic organization, a community hospital in the eastern part of the Toronto area, and they get creative, and sometimes they do a little things that are a little bit cheeky. And this was a mailing that they sent to all of their annual fund donors. So those donors that are writing $25 checks or $50 checks. $10 a month donors, and they didn't have a huge budget for it, but they sent this out. It was fairly simple, very low cost, just on a little bit of cardstock, and it was addressed to the donor. When they received it and opened it, that's what was inside, and it was on one side, all on this side are quotes from the hospital staff about thanking donors for what they've done, telling donors how their gifts have impacted their work and helped them have patient care. And on this side, they did this wonderful thing that I just love, which is talk about all the equipment that the annual fund donors provided for the hospital that year. So very simple, but often we don't even do this level of reporting for our donors. So it was fantastic. It didn't cost them very much money, but a fantastic way to show the donors that people really care about them and that it had impact. That the donations were used to help patients through the equipment that was purchased. I happen to know that inside this piece, they stuffed a business reply envelope. There was no ask, but they covered the cost of their mailing with the donations that came back from that unsolicited donations that came back using the business reply envelope. So that's something that's also a win-win, that you can basically have your stewardship costs covered and often raise money. This is another example from Rouge Valley. Again, some creativity here. And when you open it up, you see how we're all linked together when you're a donor. So I like this one. I think it's pretty clever. Full disclosure, I didn't do this. I wish I had thought of this idea. But please, if you like one of these ideas and you can adapt it, take it and use it. All right, newsletters can be very simple. This was one that we started back again when I was at the University of Alberta a long time ago. And we started it as a test, actually. We were going to track donor behavior based on whether they received a newsletter in the mail, a newsletter by email, or no newsletter at all, and see if it impacted their giving. And when we sent the first mailing out to our test group of 7,000, we received thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars worth of unsolicited gifts back. So we just went, you know, we're not going to bother testing it. We're actually making money on this. And our donors were sending notes to us saying how much they liked learning all these little tidbits about the U of A and about how their gifts were used. So we just said the right thing to do is to continue on. So you might find yourself in that position if you aren't doing a paper newsletter now. Consider it. This one's a little bit more involved. It's a 4-page newsletter. You can profile donors that are just like the majority of your average donors, right? Show them social proof that other people are giving and why they give. And I also like to use it to model behavior. You know, you can profile a monthly donor if you want to boost monthly giving, or a legacy donor if you are hoping to get more bequests. Your newsletters are really fantastic ways to do that. And again, are powerful tools to bring in more gifts, unsolicited. If you don't have a large budget, this is an easy one. We call them news briefs. Just a single sheet, double-sided. Again, looking very similar to a donor newsletter. Talk about the gifts of work, a donor profile. Very easy, very inexpensive to produce. This one was produced in-house by this client and sent in the mail. You can do email versions as well, but if you can, keep it as much paper as you possibly can in the donor's hands, especially around stewardship. Bringing your donors into the fold. So when you have a new donor, the NDWP, new donor welcome package, stuff it inside with some ways to let people reach back to you to tell them that they can update their address or their record. This was very important for the university. We shared a very warm letter, and then we sent a story, a clipping that we photocopied, you know, and we tried to make it kind of off kilter, look like something maybe your mom might send to you or grandmother might send to you in the mail. My mom might clip from the local community paper about somebody I went to high school with that's doing better than me, you know, stuff like that. Put it in. It has that low-tech, high-touch feel, and that's really a great way to deeply connect with your donors. One of my favorite things ever is this video. I hope you'll bear with me for about 20 seconds to watch this. This was done a long time ago by a small organization called the Small Change Fund. And every Friday they would gather their staff, and you'll see them all in this video, to say thank you to every donor who made a donation that week. And they would post it to their YouTube account and send it out, send the link to their donor.
Hi Tanya, this is Claire McDowell from Small Change Fund. I'm just sending you this video to say thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your donation, Tanya.
So honestly, one of my favorite things that I have ever seen. No production value, so authentic, makes you feel fantastic, and you can see that they're genuinely excited to have you as a donor and that you're making a difference. So think about the opportunities to do this. And these are things that can go on your website and be shared on social media too. Speaking of social media, you know, Facebook is your best bet at this point, given where the majority of donors are, to really do rich postings, include video, tell stories, include photos, you know, offer your donor the glimpse at your work. And also, you know, there's other opportunities, Instagram for reaching a younger audience. I really love this one from The Same You, which is Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones. This is her charity for brain injury recovery. And this little circle, red circle here, is when you click here, it takes you through like this little mini report on Instagram, which I thought was a really fantastic and innovative way to use the platform to connect with your donors. All right. So this is what I promised at the beginning that we would talk about, and I hope you've had an opportunity to get some ideas that you can put into practice to make things more personal, more emotional, and connect deeply with your donors around the work that you do, build that relationship so that you can increase donor loyalty, which will lead to large lifetime value from them, and higher orders of giving, like monthly giving, mid-level giving, even major gifts, and definitely bequests. So the more that you can boost your stewardship, the more that you can boost those relationships with the donors, you create sustainability for your organization and set the stage, set the foundation for transformative growth in the future. Thank you guys so much for taking time to join, and let's take some questions.
Let's take some questions. Yeah, we have a few that came in throughout the presentation. So while we get to those, if any of you have any questions, please pop them into the chat or the Q&A box and we will get to them. All right, so the first one comes from Olivier from Montreal, and they're saying, could it be possible to use the same thank you letter to thank a partnership of a company?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you know, some of the language might be slightly different depending on your direct relationship with the person there. You know, sometimes we don't have a strong personal connection to our corporate donors. So, you know, I would say that you want to make sure that you've got those elements of an emotional connection, of as much making it as personal as possible, as appropriate with a corporate donor, because one thing we don't want to do is be inauthentic. If we don't have a close personal relationship with our donor, our corporation, for example, then, you know, we don't want to try and force that. But as much as you can, let's incorporate those elements. And that kind of mini stewardship report is a perfect thing for your corporate donors to see. They'll love to have some tidbits to be able to share with their boss, to share at the next, you know, C-suite meeting when they're asked, you know, how their corporate responsibility budget's being spent that year. So yes, definitely can take some of those elements and incorporate them into those kinds of letters too.
Great, thanks, David. So the next question that came in, they're saying, with regards to the thank you letter, we have been hearing more and more that people are concerned about receiving letter mail for fear of the risk of contracting the virus. This has shifted our typical paper communications online. If we do send letter mail, how do we acknowledge this perceived risk? Our worry is that this mail will go right in the garbage. Not a great use of limited resources, and that is a fabulous question.
Yeah, really fantastic question. And the reality is, unfortunately, most of our direct mail goes into the recycle bin. Anyway, very few people actually open, or a lot of those letters actually don't get open. So that's my cheeky answer. There's, I don't know that there's a great way to acknowledge this unless there's, an opportunity maybe to put a message on the outer envelope around concerns around COVID, maybe some facts about how COVID is spread, and that mail is an unlikely source. Maybe that could direct somebody to an online page to explain the safety factors around it. And, the ultimate idea was, I'm sorry, I can't remember the actual number of hours. I think, is it 24 or 48 hours that the virus can live? If we can maybe put some of those facts right on the envelope, if that's a concern that you're hearing, then definitely those are great ways to also show that that you understand their concerns.
Yeah, that's great. All right, we have a third question that came in. Do you feel like automatic personalization tags in email marketing removes a step of personalization when reaching out to donors via email? I get it for big organizations, it's needed, but we don't have that many contacts, and I'm worried a mistake could ruin the relationship we've already built. Are there any best practices around this?
Yeah, I think the best practice is to worry about it and then see what we can practically do about it. In a smaller organization, if you have the ability to, not use those kinds of tags, then, that might be a great way to go. But it's tough. And I think, to be honest, it's one of those things that we might just have to live with, that there may be some mistakes made or issues with that, and that our relationship building can come from the service we give to fix the mistake, if that helps. Speaking as a former waiter, who probably made more tips fixing mistakes than giving great service in the first place, I kind of feel like that's one of those service delivery opportunities that if we got a plan for, first of all, minimizing that, and second, for what we can do to fix that. Otherwise, it's a really tough question, because it's around, where do we spend our time and effort when we're sending out dozens or hundreds or thousands of pieces of mail or email?
Great, yeah, that makes perfect sense. So that is all actually the questions that we have for you today. I don't know if anyone wants to send in a last minute question here, but we do have just a comment from Patty saying, thank you so much for this very action-oriented information. I appreciate your support. So I think everyone can agree this is really action-oriented, and we really appreciate it, David. So thank you. I'm just going to share my screen for just our last, just our final send-off here. So yes, thank you again so much, everyone, for participating today. And thank you, David, so much. That was really, really great information. I hope everyone learned something. Just before we part ways today, I just wanted to remind you all that our next session will be tomorrow. So that's Wednesday, May 27th at 10:30 a.m. PST or 11:30 p.m. EST. This session will be led by Keela's very own Deepak Sekri, who'll be presenting his session titled Best Practices with Keela, Online Donations 101. This webinar is great for anyone who is already using Keela or who's wanting to learn more about Keela, or just, for anyone who's looking for some advice on how to optimize their online donation forms. If you haven't already signed up for that, we've actually just posted a link in the comment section to sign up, or sorry, in the chat box there. So please feel free to head over there and register. And then lastly, I just wanted to remind everyone that the session today was recorded, so you'll be receiving the recording along with David's slide deck by the end of this week. Thanks again, everyone. David, I don't know if you had any last words that you wanted to say to everyone before we sign off here.
Just thank you so much. It's always great to be able to talk to people about stewardship. It's so important. And we'll also send a list of resources, and some of the things that I mentioned in the session today, to everyone who was here today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And it's definitely, we can tell that you're very passionate about it. And thank you for sharing your passion with us. It's much needed. So have a wonderful day, everyone. And we will see you tomorrow.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.